Morning, everyone. We're just going to give it a couple more minutes until probably 3 past or so, just to allow a few more people to join the session, and then we'll kick off. If you'd like to also participate on the poll that's hopefully on your screens, we'll touch on the results and share the results based on the attendees later in the session. Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Digitisation in Education webinar session. My name is Lieti Fiketti, and I'm the Information Management Solutions Marketing Manager here at Chronicle Minolta. And I wanted to welcome you all to the webinar today. So just a few logistics in regards to the session. It's being recorded and it will be sent via email to all the attendees. And you'll also be able to find it on our on-demand webinars page after the session. We'll also be answering questions at the end in the Q&A session. And if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to type them into the chat and we'll address them and weave them into the conversation as we go. Now, I'd like to introduce the other speakers we have in the session. So we have John Harding, who's our Solution Consulting Manager, and we also have Tony Smith, the Senior Solution Consultant. We have Giovanni Ferrero, who is here at the moment with Jag Kakalapudi, who are both our Senior Solution Consultants, and they'll be joining later in the session for our fireside chat. So now in this pandemic, we have seen a strain on the education sector, forced to really adapt to remote learning. So you are using tools such as Zoom, Microsoft Meet and WebEx, and that's the virtual link between teachers and students. So as a result of the pandemic and all these changes, digital transformation is now a priority and in fact has become really critical for school survival. Now, when we think about also digital transformation within the education sector, a lot of the time it's centered around the teaching aspect and the learning experience for the students. However, what we're starting to see is that it also is very critical and imperative for the non-teaching staff and the administration side of the business and the school to also be able to see how they can adopt digital transformation for survival in the current climate, as well as for growth in the future. So with our experience within our education schools and also our education clients, we've seen a lot of hesitation around embarking on this digital transformation journey. A lot of it is mainly around the fact that, one, they may not know where to start, or they are not sure what their strategy approach is. And often there's budget restrictions that also come with that. So the question that we started with at the beginning of the webinar was largely around understanding what the obstacles are within the education sector specifically, because we know there's nuances in the challenges that different verticals and industries may face. So the question that we asked at the beginning of the session was based on a Microsoft white paper report, and that white paper surveyed over 400 different organizations in regards to understanding what their biggest obstacle was in becoming a truly digital organization. So here you can see there's a split between the transformation leaders as well as the transformation followers. And I'd also like to flash and share now what the results were from the beginning poll that we asked, just so that you can see what the comparison in regards to the attendees here today, as well as against what global results were. So the results here are quite interesting, and the guys have taken note and will most likely also address this in their fireside chat. Here we can see, which is relevant to our experiences with our education customers, that lack of budget and resources, as well as immature digital culture, are two prevalent obstacles that they have, which is great because we'll be addressing that in the fireside chat. Just for comparison as well, another vertical that we did the same survey poll question to, the overwhelming majority response in the obstacle was actually in regards to their strategy. So I just want to share with you a video here based on a school in Singapore. So now that we're seeing the changing landscape, obviously from a teaching experience, you're seeing a lot of changes in regards to how they introduce technology into the learning experience. And I think it's really critical to observe how they do that because of the expectations in regards to student and family experience on the learning perspective can also have ripple effects in regards to the level of customer service or student experience, as well as parent experience that the families have with a school or with a university, for example.
But today, knowledge is no more a monopoly among the teachers, because students can get knowledge from a myriad of sources. And hence, the role of the teacher today is facilitation. That means facilitate students where they could get the right knowledge, how they could synthesize them, how they could discern the information that they get.
Velocity is defined as the rate of change of distance with time. Is it true or false? So I want you to tweet me your answer. So this is how you tweet. This is the format that you need to tweet. So you put in @ vote by tweet 1.
We look at technology very meaningfully, and we see how can we leverage this technology to make a very significant impact in the classroom instruction. I'll give you an example.
So the main point from that video that I wanted to highlight, because I've seen it a lot in different like keynote speaking, as well as other webinars, and also a lot of white papers and engagement with customers, is the ability to leverage technology. So we're seeing it really adapted really nicely on the learning experience. However, there's a slight gap in regards to when we're seeing it adopted in the non-teaching side of things, where schools can actually have a massive growth or massive savings when it comes to costs as well as efficiency. So when we talk to our customers about digital transformation, because we don't want it to be super overwhelming or daunting for how they go about that approach, also understanding, as you've mentioned, your initial stance, you might not be as digitally mature, so that's the first curve that you need to kind of overcome. We break it down in regards to 3 different stages. And during the fireside chat, the team will also refer to how they go about this process and how they work with schools to really maximize and leverage the technology in the non-teaching aspect. So in regards to digitalization, we really focus on that first stage as helping organizations go from analog to digital. It's nothing complicated. It's just in regards to anywhere that you notice that there's something manual happening within your organization where there's a human touch point. A lot of the time we can help alleviate that with some level of automation and technology. The second stage is digital integration, depending on where you are in your journey. So we might have different people here that might be further along in their evolving setup within their organization. Digital integration focuses on the disparate systems that they have within their school. So if different departments are using different systems, how is the information being connected between those different silos? And eventually working towards an evolved, completely digital arrangement within a school, and being able to use the data and all the information to make data-driven decision-making and be able to be more competitive as well as create differentiation with all the information that exists within your organization. So as the guys have their fireside chat, feel free to put into the chat because we want to make sure that you get the most information out of this. Any manual processes or any challenging processes that you have within your organization or your institution right now, put them in the chat, and that way the team can see what types of processes you have, and we'll try and weave that in regards to their discussion as well. Before I hand it over to John and kick off the fireside chat, actually, I'd like to just ask another poll to everybody in attendance in regards to what does your current archive look like? So hopefully on your screen, another poll will pop up, and it really just we just want to get a gauge in regards to how electronic and how far along you are in your digitization journey, because then we'll be able to kind of share and you can see where you kind of sit in regards to the attendees here. And then based on the experiences of existing success stories that we've helped customers with, we can also get a gauge in regards to that information. So I'll hand it over to you, John, and when you'd like to kind of pop up the results, let us know when you'd like to share.
Thank you, Leonie, and thank you for all the content that you've provided and the thoughts around where we stand and what we can help with in terms of the customer journey and experience with digitisation. So again, probably starting off, just want to make sure that, reintroduce Tony and Gio. Both of them are going to join me on the journey in terms of talking about our experience, and we're going to walk through a few examples of customers as well, just to give you some context of how we work with customers, and then just generally talk about myths, challenges, as well as starting points and other points with regards to digital challenges and transformation. So, and as per what Lieti said, feel free to ask questions along the way. We'll either address them at the end, or if we think that it's something that we're going to talk to, we'll try and talk to them as we go. Really love that engagement from the audience. There will be a couple of other polls as we go through this, just to keep you guys interested and see if there's anything that we can also understand from we're seeing with our audience today. So without further ado, we'll kind of get into it. On the screen, we have one of the examples that we've worked with successfully with a customer with regards to student archiving. So I'll throw over to Gio to talk to you a little bit more detail about the challenges that the school had and how we address them. Thanks, Gio.
Thank you very much, John and Lieti. Yes, as you were saying, this is an student record archiving opportunity that we have with St. Patrick's, one of the largest independent schools. And they came to us or approached us with basically one problem statement, which was the retrieval of records. Majority of these records were in hard copy, and they were dating back to perhaps even the 80s and beyond the 1980s. So retrieving records when they needed it, it was difficult. It will take requests. Every single request might take between 2 to 3 days. And besides time, it was the fact that you still needed to keep this in office storage and pay for the services. So the statement was they wanted to be able to retrieve these documents, and the opportunity to digitize came into this particular opportunity. So what they did is the problem actually, how we address the problem, we have a back scanning solution in which we scan all these records, we digitize them, and then we ingest them into the SharePoint solution. And when we ingested them into the SharePoint solution, which I think it is important, we sat down with them and we understood the information needs of the St. Patrick's School in order to be able to categorize and create a taxonomy that it was easy for them to retrieve the records based on the particular characteristics of the documents, and also building a taxonomy that was useful for this particular system. So we created the taxonomy, which was mainly pragmatic, based on years and the type of, as we can see on the screen, based on the years and the decades, and also based on the type of documents that they required. So we realized when we sat down with them and we understood their information needs, that there were a specific type of documents that they were constantly going back in order to retrieve, like absentee notes. And in that way, we built a system in which they were able to retrieve the documents. Obviously, this is all circumscribed in the enterprise search that it comes with SharePoint. So they are able to understand where the information is located, because the information is categorized based on the way they interact with such information, but also they could search via their enterprise search, which is an incredible opportunity. So documents or information that they needed to wait 2 to 3 days were now just retrieved instantly, even if they were dating back to the 80s.
Great, Joe. So probably looking at this, and this is a really good slide to put up, so thanks, Eddie, to moving along. You talked about the enterprise search and kind of also how the customer was engaging and trying to find data in the past. And maybe Tony, to you, how important is things like the categorization, and what are some of the misnomers that you've seen in the past with regards to customers starting on this kind of journey and being able to understand how to find their data?
Yeah, thanks for the question, John. I guess some of the myths that I've seen in many of my years approaching to solve these types of problems, and Gio touches on it with the taxonomy and just the basic classification of some documents now. You don't need to actually go to vast depths of a taxonomy that details metadata right down to the granular level. But one of the myths that does actually surface a little bit that you can do and solve everything with a global enterprise type search, which is in common languages is like a full text search. Quite simply, the approach to actually try and scan a whole run of records and allow technology, and now the technology does a great job of being able to mine into content, finding full text elements. But when you think about that a little bit wider, having keywords hit in documents one-to-many, you could easily find keywords that aren't unique. And if you've got a bucket of content that's just relying on keyword search only, you could actually have 500, 1,000 documents come back to go, hey, keyword search, you've executed that. You've got 1,000, and then you might refine it and go, oh, I've got another keyword, I can throw that in. You might get down to 500. The element of actually using a nice clean taxonomy, and it's the right weighted one, is to try and use a combination of both. And the whole notion that you can filter down your search results, as Gio just pointed out, where you can section off by years, maybe a document classification and so forth. So that can be really helpful in narrowing down your search to get to the content in a time efficient manner.
Excellent. Yeah, makes sense. Gio, probably something that you touched on. Part of the problem with regards to St. Patrick's was finding the content. I guess probably part of the problem statement was around efficiency. Were they able to give any output of how efficient they are now in terms of how long it would take them to find a document today versus possibly in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. It's day and night, to be honest. And the fact that the document is, the fact that you're risking once the document is in a hard copy for many issues, once it's digitized, you are able to actually search the document or find the document almost instantly. As Tony was saying, if you have an enterprise search, you are able to find clues within documents, but once you have a taxonomy in the way that we perhaps put it for this particular client, you are able to actually categorize and organize your information based in the way you interact with the information. And this point is very important.
Correct.
Searches, enterprise searches usually have algorithms that are global algorithms, but when you actually put a categorization in your information, it is something that speaks in the way the organization actually uses that information. Categories are properties in the information, and they just come out of the way a particular culture or organization actually interacts with the information. So it's particular to you. So when you actually categorize it, for example, what we see in the screen, it is something that it was a need. And it was an internal need for this particular organization. It's something that they know they need to go and retrieve information pretty frequently. So instead of waiting 2 to 3 days, it's something that they just could go to the year or the person or the student ID and find it perhaps in a matter of seconds.
Yeah, okay. Oh, brilliant. Okay, good outcome. What am I get the team to do? Do you want to throw up the poll results? If we can. This is interesting. Obviously, we're seeing that there's probably a skew towards that a lot of the attendees that address the poll, they've started the process. So probably from our perspective, guys, your experience, would that mean that maybe a customer has identified a few types of content or a few types of document that they might have digitized, and part of what we'd be looking to do is understand other documents that would make sense to digitize? Or how would you guys take away from that result? Maybe Tony?
Yeah, no, certainly I think it all starts with that discovery element about what, if we're looking at with supporting customers on their journey, they may have actually made some starts, understanding how they're actually prioritizing some of their data, some of their content, some of those key drivers about that digitization pathway. Again, content classification types, compliance comes into play about what content is being digitized, so it can actually start that journey for retentions and so forth. So I guess what we want to do is really get close to the customer to understand what they've actually constructed thus far, where we can assist in actually providing some recommendations about how we can actually help identify maybe some other technologies for on-ramping efficiencies that are associated. But it really does start with that conversation and understanding what drives their end objectives and their strategies to do so. There's a lot of value that we can actually add into that conversation.
I would say as well that paper is an indicator of how digital you are as an organization. The most of the paper that you have traveling around different desks or just waiting in a storage room, even for regulatory purposes, would indicate how much manual your process are. Once you convert those processes to digital process, even if you need to retain a paper copy for whatever reason, that information now could be searched, could be categorized, and could be reused for any efficiency that you could actually drive out of your own information. You're making your information work for you, right? And in the terms of regulatory compliance, once you have your information digital, you could actually automate your life cycle of information. Now, in terms of schools, they do have certain obligations in terms of retaining certain records for a certain amount of years. But what these have is perhaps the ability to actually find, categorize, organize, manage the life cycle, and perhaps take defensible positions for the organization when you need to dispose them.
Yeah. Well, the good conversation. Sorry, Tony, keep going.
Oh, no, I was just going to jump in and compliment what Gio was stating there. Again, for Mind, you're thinking about this, we've got an archive strategy potentially at play, but you've also got the day forward elements as well, where digital content can be created, may actually have a bit of a pathway or a journey where it may get printed out at some point, and understanding why something's getting printed, maybe for a signature. Again, there are other technologies where we can actually maintain the digital structure of content going forward. But if there is a point where something does generate a physical asset that needs to be digitized, again, we look at those elements and the heat map around frequency, types of content, and how do we actually manage those on-ramps to actually just seamlessly fit into the broader taxonomy or classification of content for the customer.
Yeah, very, very true. It's the whole document lifecycle. It's not
correct.
How it comes in. It may come in digital, but for whatever reason, a process might be identified that it needs its legacy turns around and says it has to be printed for whatever reason, from move to one stage or classification or an approval. Might just move on to another example, something that obviously, Gio, I'll get you to kind of talk to again with regards to what we were able to do at scale with regards to also leveraging customers' existing investment in the Microsoft 365 platform. So I'll just throw back to you with regards to the example that's being shared again.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, John. So this was a project that we did for CESA, which is the central governing body for Catholic schools in South Australia. And the problem statement for them is they did have a document management solution, but it was a legacy document. It was dispersed. It was siloed between its own structure, and it was actually referred internally as the big black hole. So what it ended up happening is in these type of scenarios is that users end up creating their own little and personal information management system, which becomes a risk and it becomes a problem in order to identify and find information and assign security if you need to assign security for the information. So the problem statement with CESA was to consolidate their silos and to apply retention system to the information so they could dispose defensively, and to increase the productivity and collaboration of their users. So what we did here is we actually categorized the information across different areas. So this is a solution that is a little bit different from St. Patrick's. And in order to do this, we use the Australian Society of Archives. They do have a record retention and disposal system for non-government schools. So we use that scaffolding as the baseline, and then based on the particular information needs of CESA, we built a taxonomy or a categorization, which we were able to apply. If you see on the fourth column, we were able to apply retention schedule. So in majority of the records for a school, there might be a requirement to keep those records up to 75 years. This is a requirement that perhaps have become a little bit more of a priority with the Royal Commission hearings and that sort of compliance and external pressure. So what we could see here is two things. First of all, an organization is a cultural entity, and it will have its own particular needs, the needs of their user. Like, for example, what we discussed at the beginning, retention, consolidation, collaboration, productivity, the way their users interact. Those are internal pressures. And then we have external pressures like compliance, regulations, and that sort of thing. And both of them are important. So the way they interact with the information might be reflected on the taxonomy, but for example, the need to retain it for 75 years is an external pressure that they need to comply with.
Yeah, okay. Do we find, and maybe Tony, this is to you, do we find there's challenges balancing or informing customers with regards to the internal versus external pressures that Gio talked about there?
Yeah, I guess the whole notion here with the pressures of compliance and so forth, it's having to address and make sure that whether you're storing that content physically and actually needing a digital pathway to better manage it and holding and retaining the content by type for the right periods and not overextending periods there. That's rather important. So you've got to again maintain not only for your immediate but the longer term nature. And I think doing some of that work and building some of those foundations, having a plan to actually establish and build upon that. You may not actually have all of the constructs, all the answers right up front, but engaging particular suppliers that can actually help that journey, establish some best practice scenarios. So maintaining not only internal stakeholders and bringing them along, but also meeting external regulations and compliance scenarios. They're obviously important considerations.
Yeah, Antonio, what that speaks to very importantly is that information, it is a living thing. As the culture and the organization is living, those information needs may change or evolve from time to time. So regulatory pressures may change. For example, many organizations outside schools that have an interaction with European entities may be subject to GDPR, but internal pressures also change. For example, we're going from digital to many other things in the way people actually work from home, work remotely. So that information changed. So this is not something that you deploy with that technology. The information notions is something that is actually very deep and encrusted within an organization. In order to understand and to keep it, you actually need to deploy the technology, but understand your information needs as an organization and your behaviors.
Just in kind of digging into that a little bit further, this gives a flexibility, I would suggest. So by deploying something and potentially digitizing your documents and your flows allows you to be a little more flexible with these changes or regulatory changes, or even things like what's happened in the last 18 months with regards to how we actually do work. So I don't know, Tony, have you seen that in the past where being able to deliver this kind of, I guess, foundation has allowed us to help customers improve on that and be flexible? I hesitate to use the word agile, but at least be flexible in the way they make changes to their experience and their document flow.
Yeah, great question, John. I guess what we try to take a position of, you're starting with a little bit of an end in mind. Now, you may not actually have the full blueprint of all things of where it's going to go, but what we do try to educate on is the key documents that are high frequency, high transaction, maybe some sensitivity about anything that is being digitized, so that there is a notion that you can try and classify every document that actually transact throughout a technology or endpoints. But I think the key play here is identifying those key documents that do circulate, that do actually have an attachment to some regulations and compliances. Now, whether or not retention period is actually set or defined, but there may be some changes in the future. But if we've got classifications identified against digital assets, well, it makes the flexibility to run processes against content that's stored, re-architect and modify. The digitisation process is, we'll talk about the on-ramp. The on-ramping mode is to obviously transpose a physical paper into a digital asset and then actually have it processed and retained in an endpoint. Having some metadata collected along the way and try to actually give it some identity. They're key things that we actually try to do, but again, finding the right weight or the balanced approach to doing that, giving all of the stakeholders that actually are overseeing this content the ability to actually use some levers to identify how we are actually going to deal and retain this content over time. So again, I think it's striking that right balance, having some of those really good conversations about what types of content need to be digitized, what is critical to operations, what content is actually being regularly searched and retrieved upon, how is that content being utilized in future spaces? Does the content need to be isolated and those types of things? So again, I think we actually take a bit of a holistic view and then try and narrow down with some good strategies and best practice about giving options for the future.
Yeah, excellent. So thank you to the team. We've thrown up another poll that would be great if you guys can interact with the end users. Can I get Leonie, can you move to the next slide for us while that poll's up, if that's possible? So I think probably align pretty well with regards to the poll, understanding some of this information, and again, leveraging the Microsoft white paper. So obviously, this is something that we've been talking about with the guys with regards to the reduction of cost, and as well as, I guess efficiency is one of those things. You're getting more out of that data, right? Regardless of how you determine what getting more out of your data is explicitly transformed into, it allows you to kind of look at those things and say that, look, they're both important, but obviously most businesses will lean one way or another. So that's why I'm interested to see, obviously the attendees today and what they have on a poll, and obviously efficiency seems to be pretty critical with regards to what the responses that we're seeing here. Guys, probably just one of those things which I'd be interested to get your thoughts on is, we're talking about retention and things like that. What's the feel with regards to, IT or someone just turning around and saying, look, we will retain everything? Is there risk? Is there challenges with regards to doing that versus, proper compliance? So maybe Gio, talk to that.
Yeah, not a problem. Well, the premise there is not deleting things like a safe strategy in order to make sure you don't delete something. And I think that's perhaps the consumption, that you don't want to delete something that you don't know. That's why you organize information. Once you have it digital, you control it, you can organize it, you can secure it, you can dispose it, and you can reuse it. So if you keep everything, the premise there is that you're going to be responsible for everything that you keep. So if you're not deleting defensively what you are supposed to out of the part of your life cycle, then you could be you're risking that you need to actually comply with actually producing that piece of paper. So if you have something, for example, from the 70s or the 60s, you are responsible to produce that piece of paper. And if it is not found within the hard copy storage or outside the storage, then you are responsible for that piece of paper unless you are able to demonstrate that you have a report in which you actually defensively dispose that out of your life cycle management.
Yeah, good point. Tony, any further thoughts on that part about the set and forget process?
Yeah, well, again, the whole notion that you can keep throwing disk and storing content forevermore, that is a strategy. But again, storing content, to Gio's point, in summary, yeah, having content stored well beyond its defined period of storage and retention, could land you in a little bit of hot water, because at the end of the day, if you've got the content stored and you get called to present it, well, if it's no longer stored, you've actually met all the regulations of compliance to actually have that record. Having content just stored away forevermore because it's not categorized and it's actually deep in your retention solutions, there is risk there. So I guess and this is why we come back to that whole notion of using the right strategies of on-ramping content, having some level of classification, metadata collection. So it actually enables, again, I keep referring back to the levers of being able to use those levers about applying those retention periods smartly and well weighted and balanced against all of your content. So when something is actually no longer required to be stored through those regulations, you can actually dispose of it, and that keeps that cycle nice and clean and efficient. Yeah, good.
So probably just kind of walking a little bit back towards, some examples that what we've been talking around, and using CISA as a bit of a litmus test on that. Gio, we've got on the slide some of the information that can be provided by Microsoft or SharePoint. Can you talk me through, how we've used this, how we've been able to, quantify what the problem statements that CISA had?
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes to what I was discussing about. Once you have a digital, you can control it, you can quantify, you can secure it. And Microsoft Office 365 has a compliance module built in that not many people know, but you could use actually, and you could actually evaluate and have a gauge how you performance against compliance. That puts the organization in a defensible position once again. So what we see is a screenshot of that implementation in which you could see your compliance score, but also how many records do you have on the retention for how many, which is the period, and you could actually drill into it a little bit more. But what this perhaps position the organization in such a way that they could start that digital and information journey, which, by the way, is not easy for many people. People actually go to what they do best, which is what the organization does, but how they manage their information, which is an asset and is the way actually they perform that activity. Not many people understand how to do it. So a tool like Office 365 or many other tools would allow you to and enable the organization to actually take control of the information and manage it.
Yeah, excellent. Probably a more generic question to you, Tony. This kind of this feedback that we're seeing on the screen, is that something that we see as a typical outcome in terms of, not the specifics about Microsoft, but the actual numbers that we would expect, the compliance, the level of compliance, the level of retention? Do you think that's a pretty typical outcome that we'd expect to see from an implementation?
Yes, no. I think it does vary. I guess as Gio's noted here with SharePoint actually having some of these modules, it does a lot of this analytical review of that content. Again, having some good technology that underpins some of that work of the digitization pathway for assets. That they're actually having some visibility. And I think it's all about that transparency, about understanding what you actually are digitizing, then having some of that information come back in feedback, and we can actually see here some information layers by also informing about what the business needs to actually do to actually modify any strategic strategies going forward. So I think all good intent to actually structure something up, see the data, understand the content that's being digitized, and then understanding that content to the next level, and that may actually inform or better inform strategies for, if you're halfway through your strategy, how do they actually continue to maintain those good pieces of work that have been done? How do we complement it? How do we become more efficient? There's a whole raft of different things that can actually come from this, but getting information and early reads about some of this compliance scoring things can actually help drive better outcomes going forward.
Yeah, excellent. So another one and another output with regards to, obviously using the Microsoft platform and using CISA again as the example, is some of, again, the productivity score. Gio, going back to you, maybe some of the high level takeaways from the productivity detail that we've got on the screen, your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, again, making information work for you. Once you are able to, one is digital, you are able to reuse it, and you are able to gain insights from your information and the way people is accessing. So what we see here is a simple dashboard that kind of gives a sense to how people are interacted with the information and which are the channels in which people is interacting with the information. And it can give you a picture of how people actually is using the information, which is completely different if you have broken silos to network drives or information that is completely manual in a corner. You wouldn't be able to actually understand and get those insights from the information. So digitizing from that particular point of view is important. It is important as well because it makes help you for your process to become more efficient once you are able to track what piece of information is going in which part of or stage of the process.
Yeah, excellent. I guess probably to kind of dig into, I guess, the Microsoft platform and things like this has some benchmarking, which I think, again, is worthwhile at least noting out there, is benchmarking that is based on the Microsoft license, if I'm not correct.
Yeah, that's correct. And that's a very good point. So because in this case, Microsoft understands that the license is an education license, the benchmark that he is offering the comparison against is a benchmark about different organizations with the same type of license within the region. So it's very contextual, and you will know how you're performing against some other entities within the same space.
Yeah, okay. And I guess probably, Tony, in your experience, benchmarking or understanding outcomes from a customer's experience, is that something that we've been able to do in the past, understanding, expected outcomes as we start talking to the customer, or is it once we get into it and we understand more about, what they are looking for in their priorities? It's kind of understanding how what information we know.
Yeah, I guess, Gio mentioned earlier about taking some baselines of taxonomy and starting with some frameworks. So, we do look at always our best practices and what is actually defined in market as a starting point. Working with the customer about their intimate needs that actually may be specific to specific areas or content types. And obviously working with those combinations of both and blending it in, driving some good conversations about meeting those outcomes. I think, I always come back to the starting with the end in mind. And then what we do is we'll actually layer up our expertise, what's actually worked well with other end customers that actually have had some problem statements that are common, and just shedding some light on some of those things where it's going to actually drive the best possible outcome. So we're always about leveraging efficiencies with on-ramping. Again, there is a lot you can actually do in that on-ramping space for digitization, which actually will land at an endpoint and we're running classification, retention rules, and analytics over the top of that. But again, coming to the table, being able to actually go beneath the skin here and actually talk about some of those lessons learned, scenarios, and really driving good outcomes from it. That's what we're all about. Yeah,
brilliant. Okay, that's good. So obviously, coming to the end of our webinar, a few things, guys, that I still wanted to kind of talk to you about. With regards to obviously CISA, we were able to have a very successful engagement, and we continue to have a really good engagement with that customer. So Gia, probably, obviously, we've got several projects with them, and along the way we've helped them. What else have we been able to help them with regards to further digitization from baseline that we showed earlier?
Yeah, so we also help them with the intranet in categorizing and designing that intranet. And currently we are trying, because this has been a model project for them, a lot of the schools that are under that government have started to understand the importance of digitization and the importance of intelligent information management. So they are starting to follow the lead of CESA, and they started to digitize their records and start to apply some of those practices in order to better manage their information. And we're going through a couple of projects with them, some of them actually, to see how we could better have a whole life cycle management of their information. They are still broken into schools in a greater scope. So some of the things that CESA are going through and thinking at the moment to become more digital.
Okay, Tony, probably, and it's an interesting, at scale kind of question. Education is very broad. Okay, so you've got everything from a primary school up to something like this, with CESA being a large organisation, and you've got universities as well. I guess probably in your broad experience, as you go to larger scale, do you see things like shadow IT and other challenges with regards to digital transformation being a challenge?
Yeah, look, I think the whole notion to when organisations have been so accustomed to printing something, storing something physically, and adding to the mounds of paper in filing rooms and filing cabinets and so forth, that as far as a change management scenario can be one of those things that addressing some of those things with I think when you look at a process of on-ramping, I keep coming back to the on-ramping scenario, try to make that process very seamless. And my reference earlier about to archiving as a process as to day forward, trying to actually create the blended approach of technology that just kind of becomes somewhat invisible. It just becomes the new norm of how content is actually managed. When something is created, there is going to actually have to be a storage or retention associated to that. And when we look at a very large implementation, we're looking for those strategies that will actually apply at scale, and the engagement of all the individuals that can get on board and quickly adapt to some of these smaller changes that will actually increment and grow. So they're very key areas of discussion under design. So when we're actually designing and architecting those solutions, we really want to talk about that, because it is rather important.
Yeah, so it is important to be iterative about some of these things rather than trying.
Absolutely. Yeah, completely agree. The whole notion is that finding somewhere to start, the whole space shuttle design up front, it can be quickly got to, we want all of these things, but ultimately the starting the digitization journey can actually start with an incremental element by focusing on some specific assets, some specific processes. And then by doing that and expanding and scaling and using some of the great work of architecture that's already been understood and defined, it's actually morphing that out to expand to new assets, new processes, and so forth.
Yeah, excellent. And probably kind of using that as a kickoff point from probably one of my last questions to you guys before we throw it open to the audience. Obviously, a lot of education has already an investment in the Microsoft 365 platform. We've shown some examples around SharePoint explicitly. Gio, what else can be, I guess, leveraged, or have you seen any in your experience with regards to minimal investment to obviously help with regards to schools, leveraging things like SharePoint or other, that they're not really sure that, or not aware of what they could be sitting on already?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, because for two reasons. First of all, education has a tremendous opportunity with the education license offered by Microsoft. And those licenses allow not only to bring SharePoint, so a lot of people have SharePoint, they really don't know how to use it. SharePoint can be brought to an intelligent information management system by applying some of the practices that we have discussed. But on top of that, the whole Microsoft range of products have a common data model in which you could actually integrate a lot of these tools like Power Automate in order to automate process, use workflows, build apps, and you could actually start building a full digital process for your organization. It is the beginning of the journey to become really digital in this space. And once you have this information digital, once you have metadata applied, the metadata is the holy grail of information. So you could use that information through Power BI to do reporting, to get insights, to actually manage that information. But this is the key point. And the key point is that you kind of need to be cultural savvy. You need to kind of have this soul searching to understand how your organization actually deal with the information. Because in reality, a lot of people have these tools. They don't really actually take the fruit out of those tools, because it is difficult for organizations to understand information. And even though they transact information in daily basis, it's not something easy. So when you have an information practitioner, what they do is they help you to translate these cultural basis to interacting with the information in a technology. So the technology is an enabler, incredibly important. But the key here is that you understand how you interact with that, so you are able to translate it into the technology that you choose. And I think Microsoft gives the schools an incredible opportunity to actually automate, classify, organize, and take insights and reuse that information.
Yeah. I guess it is all about being able to deliver a whole lot of outcomes that customers wouldn't necessarily know that they could actually implement. Things like you've talked about there, reporting through BI, automation. I guess probably even we've talked about today that previously things like SharePoint didn't allow you to do retention and labeling to that level. So like
exactly. Exactly.
So
and I would like, if I may quickly add to a point that Tony was speaking about, how to start with this. It could be overwhelming for organizations at the beginning. So we always tend to don't do big bangs. Don't go for that. As Tony was talking, go for low-hanging fruits that perhaps what we actually say is progressive improvement. Start with something that tackle. It is an easy win. It has a lot of drive adoption, and then start to tackle the most complex problems. So don't start doing automation and artificial intelligence. Start understanding the metadata model and the security model for your organization.
Yeah, brilliant. Tony, any comments on that?
No, I think Gio's nailed it there. Again, it's all about that journey, creating, making a start, getting some quick wins, and that journey will actually evolve.
Brilliant. Okay, with that, and I think we've probably left ourselves very little time for questions. I'll throw to Lieti. I think you had at least a couple that had come through, or at least one.
Yes. Thanks, guys. That was a great fireside chat. Very interesting points there. Just while I give everybody that's attending some time to put some questions into the chat, if you had any, one thing that I kind of wanted to touch on based on the poll results that we had earlier in the session is probably the second biggest obstacle that the attendees mentioned was in regards to an immature digital culture. If that is something that that a school or university or any institution is facing, what do you recommend is the best way to tackle that? Is it a people focus? Is it something that, say, for example, we can help you with, like help them with? How can they approach that obstacle they're facing?
Yeah, I could take that one, and that's a great question. And a lot of organizations are going through that process, and it is not something that is not technologically. In our intelligent information management consultancy services, we help organizations to understand their information or digital maturity level. Where are they in that journey in order to get to the goal or the Holy Grail? And the way we do it with three dimensional components. One is the technology, obviously, but also the people and the processes. So we inspect the organization on those three with the external and the internal pressures, and then we help them to understand the maturity level, and we usually issue a roadmap to how to start digitization, how to become more digital, how to start digital transformation in their organization.
Okay, great. So that's good. So they've kind of got somebody there to help them, guide them through that process. Okay, great.
100%.
Just another question that we've had is a specific one. So if staff members sync the SharePoint folders to their computers and then delete the folder, is there a way to stop all the contents disappearing? It's great to store, but how do you protect it?
Yeah, and I think the person is perhaps talking about sync folders that are from no personal content, because usually OneDrive is your personal space, but they sync in perhaps a team folder. And what happens if they delete? Well, first of all, they could prevent users from deleting content that is synced from team sites or that sort of thing. So they could prevent that, but also you could have safety nets like soft delete, in which it doesn't go to hard delete, but you could have the delete that could be approved by record management or any information manager. There are also backup technologies on the back of it, but I would say you could handle that through permissions.
Specifically, we could use things like retention as well. So what we talked about, or we showed on the screen, retention labels would also override anything that a user was doing, because it's, I guess in SharePoint today, what we would be, implementing or look to implement is like a records management side of things. So it's not allowing users to override whatever the compliance requirements are.
Yeah, that is correct. In the case something is under lifecycle management regulations, it has an overruling requirements in terms of deletion.
Yeah, excellent.
Okay, great. All right, just on time, I'm going to wrap up the questions there. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us. These are our contact details, and we have the beautiful Geo subbing in for Jag here. Just want to let you know that Konica Minolta is ready to help and support education institutions, because they want to maximise the best outcome for their continued success for their specific institution. And as you can see with the fireside chat, we have an extensive experience in helping these institutions improve financial stability, as well as how their operations flow. So anytime that you want to engage with the team, these are our contact details. Again, if you have an issue in regards to digital immaturity or want to kind of get an understanding on where you are in your digital readiness, we can help you with that with the professional services team that you've seen today. So thank you so much for your time. We hope you enjoyed the session, and a look out for the future sessions we'll have coming soon. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Giving shape to ideas. Konica Minolta.